impossible.
Shower me with praise! Time to shine!
Preparing for dust up.
Drop your weapons! You asked for it!
I was destined for.
There is a Dehya team that I came across on Luna's channel that piqued my interest. It's a team that I first thought was unfathomably based by using Chevvy in a way that I previously discussed when I first got C6 Chevreuse. But after trying it out, this might actually be my current favorite DPS Dehya team. This is Lunar OverVape Dehya with specifically C6 Chevreuse, Ineffa, and Furina, and this team uses quite a few mechanics to not only make Dehya do as much damage as she can in the team, but also to leverage the damage of Ineffa and Furina. So let's have a look at what each character can bring. We'll start off with Chevreuse. Because Furina is on the team, we won't have Chevreuse's Res Shred, but we can still give Dehya and Ineffa the attack percent buff. Now, my Chevy has just above 40k HP, so it is in fact 40% attack. C6 Chevreuse also means that Dehya is getting the ramping up damage percent buff. And the fact that this is a single target damage percent buff is actually fine in this team, because Ineffa and Furina wouldn't otherwise care about it anyway. And of course, that C6 is also a team heal, which under, let's say, the Maidens artifact set and proper use of her C4 is in fact a pretty fat team heal, which results in HP neutral gameplay. Next up we have Ineffa. Now what we do is we pop her ult to give Dehya a big EM buff. Now my Ineffa actually ends up with 2.9k attack after Chevy's buff because the EM share doesn't actually snapshot Ineffa's attack. This results in a 177 EM share. Now this is an overvape team, so there is in fact Lunar Charged uptime. So a buffed Ineffa DPS plus her own EM share does mean some big damage from her as well. We're looking at 26k Lunar Charge on top of some other Lunar Charge damage. This is actually pretty impressive considering that her kit isn't actually giving any EM to the Hydra character, i.e. Furina. Now this is also overvape, so Ineffa enables Dehya's overload DPS. The EM share that I just mentioned also buffs Dehya's Vape and overload damage. We are looking at 14k overloads in this team. My Ineffa is also running Serenade, so there is a nascent team buff that gives 60 EM to everyone. This is not just Ineffa, but also Dehya and Furina, which once again pretty much buffs everyone's DPS, so that's actually kinda nice. It's not a huge thing, but it is kinda nice. And finally we have Furina. Standard Furina shenanigans. We've got that off-field Hydro that doesn't require normal attacks, so it works with Dehya. It enables Vapes, it enables Lunar Charge DPS. We also get that big damage percent buff that works for the entire team, but that's just mainly Dehya and Furina herself. We're usually landing at around about 200 fanfare, i.e. 50% damage percent bonuses by the end of the rotation, so it's kind of just something along those lines. And of course, Furina can do quite a fair bit of DPS. I have in fact built her for DPS, that's what we're playing with. Each of these three characters serve to boost Dehya's DPS as much as possible, and in return, Dehya can give the team some interruption resistance and some damage mitigation during the setup phase of these rotations. So what is the rotation for this team? Well, you may come up with something different, but what I've landed on is Dehya's skill into Furina's skill burst into Ineffa burst only, into Chevy's skill, no need to use the burst I think, into funneling energy for Dehya to just start bursting, and of course punching until she's done. Now, I can hear the questions that you might be asking. Why not use Ineffa's skill to have a shield? Well, that's because I'm running Bacon of the Red Seas on Dehya, which has a stipulation of giving her 32% additional HP if she doesn't have a shield. And that HP is actually pretty important because I actually have at least one Dehya constellation. I'm also using Katane Crossspear on Ineffa, so as long as the enemy doesn't die beforehand, just Brigitte being summoned by her ult can pretty easily get Ineffa's energy back for another ult every rotation, so that's actually not a problem for me. how about using the Chevy ult for her C4? I personally do actually find this a little bit optional in this team. Sometimes I'd rather just put her skill on cooldown earlier so that I can just generate more energy sooner. But if you need more healing and you're running Maidens, for example, then this is actually not a particularly bad call. Getting an overload during the first rotation is usually pretty reliable, but I guess for some peace of mind, a Chevy ult can be good just to be sure. Those are the questions that I could think of at the present moment. If you have some others, feel free, of course, to pop them in the comments. Now, while we're at it, if you like this kind of content, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. By the time this comes out, we should have already had a Warframe update, so I might be doing a couple of Warframe videos as well. So if you play that game, or if you're interested in the various live streams doing, let's say, the upcoming Archon quest, then don't forget to ring that bell so you can be notified of the latest content on the channel. Oh, and hyping up this video will of course help a lot with it boosting the algorithm. Now, is this Dehia's strongest team? Well, probably not, in that there's probably some kind of team out there where she's in a strictly supportive off-fielder role that ends up doing more damage than this team because, let's say, it's a more weaker team, for example. I don't know. But in terms of DPS Dehya-centric teams, well, now we have something interesting to look at, because what are the other DPS Dehya teams? Well, off the top of my head, I can think of Overload with, let's say, Dehya, Chevvy, and then Bennett, Iansan, or Sarah, and Fischl, Autodon, A, or Miko. It's a pretty standard solution for getting just as many attack buffs onto Dehya as you can. Another option is a hyper sort of Vape Dehya variant, basically replacing Chevvy and Ineffa on this team with Xilonen and Bennett. We are therefore putting far more emphasis on Dehya's personal DPS. Another alternative is, of course, Mono Pyro, or by extension, Emily Burning. No reactions involved for the most part, no real mechanics involved for the most part, except for maybe Pyrodado snapshotting Bennett's attack buff if you're using Shangling. Based on what I have, Mono Pyro just ain't it. But what's really interesting is how Lunar OverVape seems to fare against the Hyper variant and the Overload team. Here's a comparison between the three. And what's really interesting is that the Lunar OverVape team, as we can see here, seems to be the strongest. And that's very interesting and very significant because my version of the Hyper Vape variant actually includes C2 Xilonen. So not only is Dehya getting an attack buff from Bennett, she's also getting an attack buff from Xilonen, which, by the way, results in 1.4k more attack on Dehya than the OverVape team. So it seems to me that the massively extra attack that Dehya is getting in the Hyper Vape team is actually being outperformed by a variety of things from the OverVape team, including the EM buffs, the Overload DPS, the Lunar Charged DPS on this team. Part of that might be because I'm running C4 Dehya again, which means I'm running C1 Dehya, which does seem to be a breakpoint that introduces HP scaling into her DPS to the point where I think HP stats are slightly better than attack stats, which I suspect also means that buffs like EM can actually add a bit more value than previously thought, especially since my Dehya doesn't already have a bunch of EM in her build right from the jump. On top of that, I'm trying to run on my week of Vape style rotation where the scroll buff from Xilonen applies to both Dehya and Furina's DPS, which does make it a little bit more complicated than the standard overvape rotation that I outlined a little earlier. And ending on Bennett into Dehya ult also run into an issue where there's usually some Pyro aura on the target, which if you start punching and you keep punching with Dehya, well, that Pyro aura tends to stick around, and that causes the team to end up becoming, what is that? A forward Vape Furina team. Look, as much as I like forward Vape Furina, I don't think this is going to result in more DPS for a team like this. All of this to say, I wonder if getting C6 Dehya would result in a balance between the two teams in some meaningful way, where they both end up about as strong as each other, or at least about as strong as each other when you have C2 Xilonen. So for the rest of us who don't have Xilonen constellations, I get the feeling the OverVape team is probably going to be always stronger than the actual Vape team. Couple of things to note and then we're done. There's one specific alternative member that I want to highlight for this OverVape team, and that's Aino. Unless you find yourself with the world's strongest Aino and the world's weakest Furina, or if you don't even have Furina at all, Aino is specifically relevant for any content that shills Ascendant Gleam, which I believe at the present moment as of recording is specifically the Nodcry artifact domain. I've got a super scuffed Instructor Aino build going on for even more EM on Dehya and Ineffa. Ascendant Gleam in this team with Aino and Ineffa does in fact buff the Serenade set, which means I get even more EM shared through that. Ascendant Gleam also happens to nerf Wild Hunt enemies, I believe. Like the guy in the Artifact domain, it's basically a nerf to the special HP shield, not shield type phase that Wild Hunt goes into after you've depleted their HP bar. All of this seems to culminate in the Ascended version of this team clearing the domain faster, and I am of course comparing my extremely scuffed level 70, not even remotely built Aino with my very well built top 2% maybe Furina. And finally, let's quickly go through the builds of these characters so that everyone has a very clear idea of what I'm playing with. Dehya is running a 4-piece Vorukasha's build with Bacon. 127 ER seems to be barely enough for most content. Sometimes I do find it lacking, so I would recommend going for a little bit more than this, actually. An alternative artifact set, therefore, would of course be EOSF. Things might change if I get her C6. Pyro Cups are a bit stronger for the DPS, but I only have one particularly goated Pyro Cup and it's being used by father. I have an obnoxiously strong HP Cup that I would otherwise not be using, so that's why I've stuck with that for this build. Chevvy on Maidens for the aforementioned extra healing with Magical Girl. Just enough HP to max out the attack buff at 40%. Don't really need ER when I'm running Magical Girl. An alternative artifact set if you really want more attack is of course Noblesse. Now this would buff both Dehya and Ineffa, which actually in turn would mean more EM shared by Ineffa for Dehya. You would need to use Chevy's burst all the time though, so maybe building some ER would be a good idea. Serenade on Ineffa built for DPS with Katane. I would go so far as to say Katane is Ineffa's actual best in slot weapon. It's so easy to get her ult back every rotation without even thinking. Seems like the perfectly fine option to run on this character. An alternative set though would be of course Tenacity of the Millilith. It's kind of like Noblesse in that it'll buff both Dehya and Ineffa, which in turn gives Dehya more EM from Ineffa as a direct result of that A1 passive. And finally, we have Furina on Golden Troop built for DPS, and I'm of course running an R2J cutter, so use your DPS Furina weapon of choice. I continue to lean a little bit harder on the ER for Furina, just so I can use her ult every rotation. Sometimes it does get a little bit scuffed, especially something like Spiral Abyss, when a chamber ends just a little bit too early, in which case I'd rather just start punching and use Furina's ult in the next rotation, instead of waiting for Furina's ult to come back. So that's the Lunar OverVape Dehya team. It seems to be strong enough to deal with Spiral Abyss at the very least, maybe not so much on the merciless Stygian Onslaught, and I guess by definition dire Stygian Onslaught, I guess unless you've wailed big time, in which case Dehya might not be the one who's doing the damage per se. But anyway, doesn't matter. It's still a really fun team to play if you really enjoy that DPS Dehya gameplay, so I really recommend that you at least try it out and see if this works for you. Let me know what you think about all this in the comments below. How do you feel about DPS Dehya teams such as this? In fact, what is your favorite DPS Dehya team? Maybe there is a team out there that I haven't thought about that might be comparable to a team like this. Let me know in the comments. Otherwise, hope you guys enjoyed. If you like this video, hit that like button, subscribe for more Genshin Impact action, and until next time, I'll see you guys later. Thanks for watching. Bye.
Ultimatum protocol. You're dead meat. Justice will prevail. Shower me with the cleanup sequence initiated. Look alive.